My name is Dan Bob, and I'm Senior Advisor and Director of U.S.-Japan Programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. We are delighted we have such a large audience today, and I think that's very much testament to the speaker that we have tonight, the Honorable Seiji Maehara. Very briefly, we're having dinner until 7:30 when Congressman Jim McDermott will introduce our honored guest and speaker, Seiji Maehara. Jim is, of course, from Washington State, but he's also co-chairman of the Congressional Study Group on Japan, which is one of the co-sponsors of this dinner, along with Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan, as well as us, SPF USA. So thank you all again for coming. Enjoy your dinner, and we'll see you again at 7:30.
And duty to introduce one of our speakers this evening. I'm Jim Slattery. I served in the United States Congress for 12 years from the great state of Kansas, the land of Jayhawks. And let's give it up for the Jayhawks, huh? But since leaving the Congress, I have been actively involved in the Association of Former Members of Congress, having served as president of the association from 2008 to 2010. So it's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. For almost 2 decades, the association's Congressional Study Group on Japan has been actively working to strengthen the U.S.-Japan relationship. This evening, it is my privilege to introduce the co-chairman, I should say, of the study group, Congressman Jim McDermott from the state of Washington. I had the pleasure of working with Jim while I was in the Congress for a number of years and saw firsthand his leadership on issues and dedication to greater international understanding. He is and has always been a voice of reason in the United States Congress, and goodness knows we need voices of reason these days. Jim is one of the few medical doctors that serves in the United States Congress, and after graduating from medical school, he joined the Navy, and for several years really served our troops as they were returning from the war in Vietnam. Jim was elected to office first as a member of the Washington State House of Representatives, and then later served in the Washington State Senate. And then in 1988, the people of the 7th District in Washington elected Jim to represent them in the United States Congress, where he serves as a senior member on really one of the most important committees in the United States Congress, the House Ways and Means Committee. He has had a long-standing interest in Asia, stemming from his work with his constituents in the 7th District of Washington. He has many Asian Americans in his district, so it was natural for him to take an interest in these issues. Over the years, Jim has sponsored several pieces of legislation in support of Asian Americans, and he has led many important programs, such as the U.S.-Japan Legislative Exchange Program. He also serves as the ranking member on the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Trade, and he has really distinguished himself as really an expert on international trade issues and also on Asian issues. So Jim was also an early supporter of House Resolution 172, which called for assistance to the people of Japan after the devastating earthquake and tsunami of 2011. Jim is clearly someone who in the Congress values and deeply appreciates the importance of the relationship between the United States and Japan, and he has dedicated a big part of his time in the United States Congress to improving this very, very important relationship. So it's a pleasure for me this evening to introduce to you Congressman Jim McDermott from the 7th District of the state of Washington. Congressman McDermott.
Good evening. Thank you, Jim. As I was listening to your introduction of me, I was thinking about how I got involved in Japanese-American relationships. Tom Foley was my mentor. Tom Foley was the speaker when I got to the Congress, and we were describing what was going on in 1988 when members of Congress were bashing Toshiba television sets on the steps of the Capitol, and Tom and I talked about that and said, we got to do some way to change the tempo around here, and that's really how I got involved. It has been a natural kind of connection because when you live on the Ring of Fire, as we do in Seattle and in Japan, you know about earthquakes and you know about all the natural disasters that really tie us together as human beings, never mind politics. But the involvement with the Japanese earthquake in Kobe, our sister city from Seattle is Kobe. They had an earthquake, we've had earthquakes, the tsunami and so forth. So it has been a long-standing relationship, and it's really on behalf of the Congressional Study Group for Japan, which I chair with Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia. It is a pleasure tonight to have the opportunity to introduce Seiji Maehara, one of the leading thinkers in Japanese politics today. The Congressional Study Group was created to give members of Congress a way to understand what is our largest trading partner and one of the most powerful economic forces in the world, and yet it's mostly unknown in this country. So we wanted to have a group in the Congress that actually exposed members to meeting when people like Mr. Maehara come to the United States. We wanted to have an opportunity to have a forum for them to be met by American members. It's an honor, really, to convene this dinner with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan and the Sasakawa Foundation here in the United States, here in Washington, D.C. Our three organizations are dedicated to promoting the understanding and cooperation between the United States and Japan and the broader Asian Pacific. I also want to thank my good friend Dan Bob. Dan is now with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. I first traveled with him to Japan, I think it was in 91 or 92, and I've known his leadership and his involvement since that time. He was a part of the Business Advisory Council, and it is really a real pleasure to introduce Seiji Maehara, a 20-year veteran of Japanese Diet, who currently serves as the chairman of the Democratic Party of Japan's Policy Research Council. Now, I've served in the Congress for 24 years. You learn a lot. And he's sort of taken it one step. He's gone up and decided he'd try and figure out how to get the guys in the Diet to begin to think about what they ought to be doing. In this role, he is the chief architect of the majority party's legislative agenda. So you will hear tonight from someone who is at the center of deciding the direction that Japan is taking in this present government. He is perhaps best known for being the youngest foreign minister in post-war Japanese history and the superb work that he did through that era. He was an extraordinary foreign minister. Among his other positions, Mr. Maehara served as Minister of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism, as well as Minister of State for Okinawa and Northern Territories, and was a six-term member of the House of Representatives. I have no doubt that he has a bright future ahead of him. If you talk to people in this room, you will hear a lot of things that people think about his future. And I would now like to turn the program over to Mr. Maehara, who will share with us his perspectives on the U.S.-Japan alliance and the future of our bilateral relationship. Anybody who's been involved in this whole area recognizes the issues that have continued to nag at us, like Okinawa and others, and it will be very interesting for us tonight to hear from someone who is designing the policy between our two countries. I look forward to hearing from you, and it is a great pleasure for me to present Seiji Maehara.
Honorable members of Congress, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you, Congressman McDermott, for the generous introduction. I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak before such a distinguished audience. And I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dan Bob of Sasaka Peace Foundation, USA, as well as to the Congressional Study Group on Japan and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan for making this event possible. At the outset, I'd like to extend my heartfelt condolences to families of Ambassador Christopher Stevens and 3 other Americans senselessly killed in Libya. I strongly condemn this horrific act of violence, as do all of the people in Japan. I'd like to convey my deepest sympathies to all those affected by this terrible event. Yesterday marked the 11th anniversary of the terrible 9/11 terrorist attacks. Since that dark day, the United States has focused much of its international security attention on fighting terrorism around the globe and prosecuting wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq. This year, with the end of the war in Iraq and the wind down of the war in Afghanistan, the United States has begun to implement a new security strategy based on rebalancing its attention and resources toward the Asia Pacific. As that strategy is more fully realized over coming years, coordination with Japan, America's most important and steadfast ally in the region, will become even more important than it is today. The strengthened U.S. commitment to the Asia-Pacific, even in the face of greater budget austerity, will contribute greatly to regional security, stability, and shared prosperity. It is a development I personally welcome, as does my party and my country. One major factor underlying Japan's support for America's rebalancing effort is that even as the global economic center of gravity shifts to the region, Asia-Pacific security dynamics have become increasingly complicated. Tonight, I would like to give a few of my own thoughts on the situation in the Asia-Pacific and on the future of the U.S.-Japan alliance. Let me begin by touching on China. Beijing's defense budget has grown annually by double digits, yielding a 30-fold increase in spending over the past 24 years. At least according to public Chinese government sources, which, if anything, tend to underreport the size of the country's military. Yet, even as China has constructed formidable armed forces, the country has steadfastly refused to tell the rest of the world what it intends to do with its growing military might. The expanding range and often antagonistic nature of Chinese naval operations is a particular source of concern throughout the region. Most notably, China's actions in the South China Sea are rooted in logic and claims inconsistent with established international maritime norms. Such behavior suggests that China is far less concerned about the ramifications of challenging the current international order or accepted international values underlying that order than it used to be. Since 2010, China has also sent law enforcement vessels to the sea area near the Senkaku Islands, which are inherent territories of Japan, about once a month. China's actions represent a clear attempt to defy accepted circumstances. Japan has responded calmly but firmly in order to prevent escalation and protect the stability of the border region. Yet last month, despite repeated warnings from Japan, activists from Hong Kong illegally landed on the Senkakus. So, in accordance with domestic law, Japan deported the activists. On September 11, the government of Japan decided to purchase 3 of the Senkaku Islands in order to maintain the present status, which China reacted by noting that Japan would be responsible for whatever may ensue. Japan will respond calmly. Japan's relationship with South Korea has also been tested recently. Like Japan, South Korea is a treaty ally of the United States. South Korea also happens to be an important partner of Japan. We share fundamental values, have important economic ties, and both benefit from regional peace and stability. And while we place great value on Japan-South Korea relations, President Lee Myung-bak's visit to Takeshima Island, and then his statement about the Japanese emperor, both crossed red lines for the Japanese people. Indeed, those two incidents have had an enormously negative impact on relations between Tokyo and Seoul, and on the Japanese public's views of South Korea. President Lee's highly regrettable actions, moreover, ultimately don't serve South Korea's own interests. For our part, Japan will deal with these issues in a peaceful but resolute manner. Regarding Takeshima, we will file a complaint with the International Court of Justice. I strongly believe that it would also be helpful for all concerned if South Korea acknowledged the importance of its relationship with Japan, as well as the shared benefits that Japan, South Korea, and the United States will derive from enhanced trilateral cooperation. While Japan is paying close attention to the U.S. response to the regional developments I have described, we plan to coordinate closely with Washington as it implements its strategic rebalance towards the Asia-Pacific. We also plan to strengthen the Japan-US alliance and fulfill Japan's own regional and global role. To achieve these objectives, I believe we should focus on 4 important areas. First, while deepening our understanding of U.S. extended deterrence, we should examine the respective roles, missions, and capabilities of both Japan and the United States. We should accelerate defense cooperation in a wide range of areas, including missile defense, maritime security, space, and cyberspace. Japan-US cooperation in cyberspace, a new domain for both countries, is especially important. As we deepen our technical cooperation to enhance cybersecurity and our operational cooperation in response to cyber attacks, we should also work together towards establishing international norms and rules in this area. In addition, we should enhance dynamic bilateral defense cooperation in such areas as joint training, joint surveillance, and reconnaissance activity. Shared use of facilities should play a more important role, as should shared training facilities in Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, with the latter now under construction through mutual efforts. This enhanced level of joint activity represents an important step toward ever closer security cooperation. A second area of focus should encompass the legal norms necessary for the security of the region. For Japan, the primary task is a review of the right of collective self-defense. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that Japan should reflexively cooperate with the United States in each and every military operation. Yet, when Washington acts in response to a conflict near Japan, such as one that might possibly occur on the Korean Peninsula, and when such U.S. operations contribute to Japan's critical security interests, Japan should be able to act in cooperation with or in support of the United States. If Japan cannot act in such situations due to current constitutional interpretations, ones that run counter to globally accepted norms regarding the exercise of the right of collective self-defense, Japan will suffer negative consequences, and so too will the Japan-US alliance. I believe that the time has come for Japan to move beyond largely academic debates over collective self-defense, which ultimately leads us nowhere in terms of addressing real-world problems. The argument that Japan inherently possesses the right of collective self-defense, but our Constitution doesn't permit its exercise, for example, or that only some logistical support activities can be deemed an integrated part of the use of force prohibited under the Constitution, don't permit us to play the sort of role in promoting peace and stability that we should, and that the current security environment in the Asia-Pacific demands. We must now, at last, engage in more sophisticated and more realistic discussions of instances where the exercise of the right of collective self-defense is self-evident. In my view, many cases exist, including, for example, defending U.S. naval vessels on the high seas or carrying out refueling missions for U.S. forces engaged in areas surrounding Japan. Already in Japan, there has been some movement towards reviewing the issue of collective self-defense. A report by the Frontier Subcommittee, a panel of experts established by the government of Japan, proposed an assessment of the interpretation of the right of collective self-defense. The domestic party of Japan, as a ruling party, should seriously engage in discussions on this issue. In a third area, we need to establish a firmer foundation for security and defense cooperation between Japan and the United States. Japan should enhance its information security systems because until we do so, we cannot expand security and defense cooperation. Toward this end, my party aims to submit a new bill that will result in an enhanced government information security system because ultimately, Japanese lawmakers themselves must take the initiative. We must engage in discussion on this matter with a view towards establishing new legal requirements to safeguard security information. Close collaboration in the area of equipment and technology will also provide for stronger security and defense cooperation. Last year, when I visited Washington, I proposed revising Japan's 3 principles on arms exports. Shortly thereafter, the government of Japan reviewed those principles and devised new guidelines for the overseas transfer of defense and other equipment in order to allow more robust joint development and production projects with the United States. That was a welcome step forward. However, the guidelines have yet to be applied to any actual projects. Fourth, to strengthen confidence in the Japan-US alliance and its layers of security and defense cooperation, we must mitigate the impact of US forces on Okinawa. The Japan-US alliance will not function without the understanding of the people of Okinawa, because that is where 74% of all facilities and areas designated for the exclusive use of US forces in Japan are concentrated. In the 2+2 joint statement this past April, our governments decided to adjust the realignment plan for US forces to moderate the impact on Okinawa as soon as possible, while at the same time maintaining deterrence. With this adjustment, we can begin to move forward with the realignment of US forces in Japan based on what is achievable. This adjustment will not only lessen the impact on Okinawa, but also allow for a more optimal US force posture and for enhanced deterrence. Meanwhile, it is important to understand that Maritime Corps Air Station Futenma cannot be used indefinitely. I will continue to make my best efforts at gaining the understanding of the Okinawan people that, in accordance with the Japan-US agreement, the only viable solution is to relocate MCAS Futenma to Henoko. At the same time, the United States must resolve the issue associated with the relocation of U.S. Marines from Okinawa to Guam. Discussion in the U.S. Congress over the budget for the relocation to Guam is key. In order to speed up Guam relocation, it is critical that the funds contributed by Japan are released and that necessary U.S. funds are secured. Having spent some time this week with leading members of the Senate and the House, their understanding of the significance of the Japan-US alliance is readily apparent. And so, I am confident that Congress will soon take appropriate measures to solidify the foundation of the alliance, regardless of the outcome in November. In the context of Okinawa, the deployment of the MV-22 Osprey aircraft constitutes a critical new development. I fully understand that the high-performance Osprey will contribute to the security of Japan and to the Asia-Pacific region. But it is also the case that many Japanese feel anxious about the safety of the Osprey, especially after accident in Florida and Morocco earlier this year. Given the recent problems, if there were an Osprey accident in Okinawa, there is no doubt that serious damage to the Japan-US alliance will result. Our two governments, therefore, must manage the associated risk as carefully as possible and make efforts to dispel the anxiety of the Japanese public. While the government of Japan needs to explain the significance and the safety of the Osprey to the Japanese public, the U.S. government must employ each and every measure possible to ensure the safe operation of this aircraft. If we can move forward in the 4 areas I have outlined, we will strengthen the alliance and enhance security and stability through the region. Ultimately, though our alliance is built on a foundation of trust and of bonds that go well beyond defense. And so it is critical that we cooperate not only in terms of security, but also politically, diplomatically, and economically. As members of APEC, both Japan and the United States support that organization's most important goal of building a region-wide free trade area. To achieve that goal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is one of the most promising platforms, and in my view, Japan should join TPP as soon as possible. For over 50 years, the Japan-US alliance, shaped by shared values and mutual interest and nurtured by continuous care, has been the cornerstone of our bilateral relationship. Yesterday, on the anniversary of the 9/11 tragedy, I had the privilege of laying a wreath at the Pentagon Memorial in recognition of the terrible losses we suffered that day. It was a moving moment for me because it brought back memories of that horrific day when so many innocent Americans, as well as innocent people from all around the globe, including 24 of my countrymen from Japan, were senselessly lost in an attack by a brutal band of terrorists. It was a day that galvanized the world and one that brought the United States and Japan together as partners and allies as never before. I couldn't help but also recall the terrible events of March 11 last year, when a natural disaster struck my own country, and how the United States responded and worked so closely with the people of Japan to help alleviate the suffering caused by the earthquake and tsunami, and to support our efforts to contain the danger posed by the nuclear disaster at Fukushima. In both instances, tragic in such different ways and posing such different challenges, the Japan-US alliance demonstrated its critical importance, and the Japan-US relationship proved its vitality and strength. As a member of Japan's Diet, I am committed to further enhancing the alliance and broadening and deepening our bilateral relations. I do so because in the end, the Japan-US partnership is indispensable, not only for the security and stability of our two nations, but also for the peace, stability, and prosperity of the Asia, Pacific, and beyond. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Maehara Sensei. That was a terrific, thoughtful speech. We really appreciate it. Maehara Sensei has generously agreed to take a few questions from the audience, and I only ask that you wait for the microphone, identify yourself, and make it a question, not a statement. And if I could, I'd like to offer the first question to Congressman McDermott. He's deferred to the audience, so who would like to ask the first question? Stanley Roth.
Hello, good to see you again. You've laid out a very powerful case for strengthening and deepening the alliance in all its aspects, but especially talking about security. Could you comment a bit about the ability of both Japan and the United States to do that in light of the cuts to the defense budget? We've seen cuts in Japan, fairly significant ones, just in the past few days, and we're talking about much deeper cuts here in the United States. So can the alliance be deepened in meaningful ways with these kind of budgetary cuts?
我々の同盟をあらゆる側面において、こう強化し進化することに重要性について強く訴えられましたけれども、日本とアメリカが果たしてそういうことができるわけでしょうか。ちょうど数日前に日本において、防衛予算がかなりカットされるという話がありましたし、アメリカにおいては、さらに大きなカットをするという議論があるということで、そのような状況の中で、今訴えられたような同盟強化というのは可能でしょうか。
ロスさん、お久しぶりで、国務省で働いておられたとき何度もお会いをして、大変いいパートナーとして仕事をさせていただいたこと、本当に、今でも誇りに思っております。
Mr. Roth, it's really good to see you again as well. I saw you many times at the State Department, and you were a great partner.
確かに日米とも財政状況が厳しくて、防衛費を削らなきゃいけないという状況があるのは事実であります。
It's true that both the U.S. and Japan have difficult fiscal environments in which all of the desires in the defense area cannot be realized.
しかし、予算は限られていても、いろんな知恵を絞って、我々の同盟の機能性を強化するということは可能だと思います。
I do think, though, that it is possible for us to strengthen the functionality of our alliance in various ways, even if there are limited budgets, by sharing knowledge.
例えば、日本について申し上げれば、いまだに冷戦状況から脱しきれていない北方重視の形態を現在の日本の状況に合わせて機動的に対応できるように部隊編成を変えるということでお金をかけずに日本の能力を強化するということは可能だと思います。
One of the ways in which we can improve our capabilities, in which we have, is that Japan had been stuck in a Cold War type deployment that was focused on the North, and without using any more money, we were able to improve our capability by making our units more mobile and reorganizing them.
また、先ほど私がお話をしたように、法律を変えると、あるいは規制を緩和する、憲法解釈を見直す、そのことによってより機能的な協力活動ができる余地というのはまだまだあるんではないかと思います。
And some of the things that I alluded to earlier, such as changing our laws, such as deregulating, such as changing our interpretation of the Constitution, could all be ways in which I think there's still a lot of room to improve our functionality.
また、これも先ほど申し上げましたけれども、日本は去年の暮れに武器三原則の見直しを行い、共同開発、共同生産ができるような体制になりました。
And as I mentioned earlier, at the end of last year, we revised our three principles on arms exports, and it's now possible for us to co-develop and also jointly manufacture with the United States.
共同で日米が何らかの兵器を共同で開発し生産をするということになれば、お互いの技術を持ち寄り、よりいいものをより安く作るということも可能になるのではないかと思います。
By developing weapon systems jointly, the U.S. and Japan can come up with even better systems at lower prices.
したがってお互い同盟国として、お互いの内情をよく分かり合っているわけですから、知恵を絞り協力をすることによって限られた予算の中でも日米同盟関係を進化強化することは可能だと私は思います。
So though we do face difficult fiscal environments, I think that it will be possible for us to deepen and strengthen our alliance by doing these kinds of considerations, by being smart and by sharing knowledge and wisdom.
Thank you very much.
Jim.
Maehara Sensei, Kelly, another former official, Could I ask you, sir, considering the use of nuclear power in Japan, the loss of confidence of Japanese people in members of the nuclear club is quite understandable, but the costs are very great. Do you see any future for nuclear power generation in Japan?
これは
はい、原子力の話ですけれども、日本の国民のその原子力を支持するような議員たちに対して信頼を失ったということは理解できますけれども、原子力をすべてやめるということになりますと非常に大きなコストにもなるということで、日本において原子力はいかがでしょうか。将来はありますでしょうか。
ケリーさんと久しぶりにお会いできて大変光栄に思っております。ケリーさんは私の、先生のような人でありまして、朝鮮半島問題、特に北朝鮮の問題については、よく意見交換をし、多くのことを学ばせていただきました。心から信頼をし、尊敬をしている方であります。
Mr. Kelly, it's an honor to see you once again. You have been like a teacher to me on the Korean Peninsula, particularly on North Korea. I had the chance to exchange views with you often and learn a lot from you. I appreciate that very much.
原子力については昨日ですね、エネルギー省のポネマン副長官と1時間ほどじっくり日本の立場を説明をさせていただきました。
I had the chance to present Japan's stance on nuclear power to the Deputy Secretary of Energy, Kahneman, yesterday.
まず日本の方以外の方々に対してぜひご理解をいただきたいのは、絶対に安全だと言われていた原発が事故を起こし、今なお34万人の方々が避難生活を余儀なくされていると。そしてまた放射能に対しての恐怖というものを感じている方々が、原発事故を起こした原発周辺の地域におられると。それを味わった日本人、しかもアメリカ NRC などの協力によって、ひどい事故ではありましたけれども、今の程度で収まっておりますけれども、政府はさらに悪いケースを想定をし、首都圏では3000万人の避難計画というものも作られていたぐらいであります。
Now, I would ask for those of you who are not from Japan to please understand that although we were told that these plants were absolutely safe, the fact is we did have an accident. And 340,000 people are still having to live their lives evacuated from the region around the plants, and others, as well as them, live in fear of radioactivity. And so this affected the Japanese people quite a bit. The U.S. gave wonderful cooperation, notably through the NRC. And although it was a terrible, serious accident, we were able to keep things at the level that they are. But the government had made plans for an even worse case where up to 30 million people around the area might have to be evacuated.
一旦事故を起こしたら人間の手に負えないものであるということを日本人は身をもって感じたわけであり、しかもアメリカと違って狭い国土で1億2800万人がひしめき合って生活をしている状況で、ひとたび事故が起これば大変な影響が起こるということを我々は認識をいたしました。
So the people of Japan felt in a very direct way, experienced directly the fact that once an accident occurs, then it can things can develop quite easily out of the control of people. Also, our territory is small, and so for our entire population to have to be subjected to this kind of risk is something to take into consideration.
他方で、事故が起きる前までは、3割以上の全電力の3割以上を原子力に頼っていたという事実もあります。
On the other hand, it is true that before the accident, we relied on nuclear power for 30% of all of our electrical power generation.
また、核燃料サイクルを行うという前提で、青森に再処理工場を作らせてもらい、そして使用済み燃料を保管をさせてもらっています。
And we had also created a plant that would reprocess fuel. すみません、あんまりよく聞こえません。すみません。Sorry about that. The acoustics are a little bad back there.
もう一度言いましょうか。
お願いします。
はい。どういう話をしましたかね。
再処理工場。
一方で、他方で、3割以上の電力を原子力に頼っていたし、また核燃料サイクルを行うという前提で青森県に再処理工場を作り、そして、使用済み燃料を、中間貯蔵させてもらっています。
So we relied on on nuclear power for 30% of our electricity. We had also created a reprocessing plant in Aomori Prefecture based on the premise that we would have a nuclear fuel cycle, and we engaged in long-term storage of spent fuel.
また原発をむしろ比率を高めていくという前提で、アメリカと原子力協定、原子力協力を行ってきて、そしてアメリカ由来のいわゆる核燃料というものも我々は使用してきたという事実もあります。
And it's also true that the premise was that we would increase our dependence on nuclear power, and we had nuclear power cooperation with the United States, and we had nuclear fuel cooperation with other countries as well. This is true.
また、日本が急激に原発比率を減らせば、世界の原油やあるいは天然ガスの価格がさらに上がることになるでしょう。
And if Japan sharply reduces its reliance on nuclear power, then world oil and natural gas prices will be likely to rise.
そういうことも含めて、我々は大体40年間ぐらいを一つの原発ゼロを目指す期間として、徐々に現実的にその比率を減らしていき、代替エネルギーなどを開発をし、また今まで協力をし合ってきたステークホルダーとはしっかりと相談をしながら、対応していくということが大事なことではないかと考えております。
So in light of all this, we feel that it's important to aim for zero nuclear power over a 40-year period. And it would be something that we did gradually in a realistic manner, all the while developing alternative energies and continuing to consult with the partners that we have been cooperating with so far in the field of energy.
Thank you very much.
Fred.
Maehara Sensei, thank you for your talk. You said that China has shown itself to be less respectful of international norms and the values that underlie them than it used to be. Do you think the U.S. and Japan have adequately adjusted to that change, or do you think further evolution of alliance policy is needed in light of that?
お話をどうもありがとうございました。中国は過去と比べて、国際的な基準や、それを裏付けるような価値観などを、あまりよく尊重しなくなったと いうことだと思うんですけれども、日本とアメリカは十分この変化に調整をしてきたと思われますでしょうか。あるいは日米同盟をさらに進化させていく必要がこれによって生まれたと思われますでしょうか。
ご質問ありがとうございます。まず大前提としては、中国を含めて世界の国々が今まで多くの戦争あるいは話し合いを経て築き上げてきた世界の秩序あるいはルール、こういったものをしっかり守るということがまず大前提であるということを確認をさせていただきたいと思います。
Thank you very much for that question. I think that, first of all, we have to have a basic premise that all countries in the world, including China, ought to follow the order that has been built up over the course of many wars and discussions. And they ought to follow that in a strict manner.
例えば中国に関して言えば、国連海洋法条約で認められている各国の航行の自由であるとか、あるいは WTO で差別的な輸出制限をしてはいけないとか、そういうことにともすれば違反をしているんではないかという事例が今まで散見をされてきました。
In the case of China, it has been suggested that they have been in violation, for example, of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and its provisions regarding various countries having freedom of navigation, or in the case of the WTO, in engaging in discriminatory export controls.
日米はそういった変化というものは十分に認識をしていたと思いますけれども、ではそれに対して十分な対応を取れてきたかどうかというと、それは疑問の残るところもあります。
I think the U.S. and Japan were certainly aware of these changes. As to whether the U.S. and Japan had an adequate response, I think that's debatable.
同じ価値観、そして国際的なルールを尊重する国々と連携をし、決して中国を封じ込めるのではなくて、そういった国々の連携の中で中国があるいは他の国も世界の築き上げられたルールあるいは規範、こういったものを守るように導くということが大事で、その先導役を共に日米が果たしていくということが大事だと、このように感じております。
So I feel that it's important for countries in the world that share the same values and that uphold the international order that I just spoke of, that they not try to contain China, but rather to lead China towards a situation in which they would respect these rules and standards that have been built up in the world, and that the U.S. and Japan can take a leading role in that.
We promised Maehara Sensei we'd end promptly at 8:30. He's had 2 14-hour days, 22 meetings by my count since he's been here. But if you're willing to take one last question, maybe from the back or the front.
Okay, please.
Oh, okay.
Hi, sir. Welcome back to Washington. My name is Nadia Chao from Liberty Time, Taiwan. First of all, we see the Senkaku Island rhetoric before, but this time we see much more escalation. I wonder, do you understand why? And we see some people in China try to use this opportunity to test the commitment of the U.S., the defense treaty. Do you think Japan is ready to prepare for military confrontation? And for the proposal by President Ma from Taiwan about the peace initiative in East Sea, do you see, there's a serious possibility for that? Thank you.
台湾から参りました。今回は過去よりもエスカレートしているということでありますけれども、それはなぜでしょうか。中国の一部の人たちはこれを一つのチャンスとして見なして、アメリカの防衛の条約に対する決意を試す機会になっているように見ているわけでしょうけれども、いかがでしょうか。日本は軍事的な衝突に備えを十分していると思われますでしょうか。また台湾の大統領の東の海に関する平和イニシアティブは、これは真剣に受け止める真面目な取り組みだと思われますでしょうか。
はい、ご質問ありがとうございます。尖閣は、これ紛れもなく日本の固有の領土であります。1895年に、それから10年間遡って、この島については他の国が支配していないかどうかを慎重に見極めた上で、10年間どの国も全く尖閣についてタッチをしていないという確認を取った上で、我々は閣議決定をして尖閣諸島を日本に編入をいたしました。
Well, thank you very much for that question. As to the Senkaku Islands, they are unmistakably an inherent part of the Japanese national territory. For 10 years leading up to 1895, the Japanese government carried out a careful check to see whether or not any other countries had controlled it. And since it was determined that they were aware of no other country having done so, the cabinet made a decision to incorporate these islands into our territory.
実際、中国や台湾が尖閣の領有権を主張し始めたのは1970年代の前半で、あの地域の海底に資源があるのではないかと言われ始めてから領有権を主張し始めたと認識をしています。
My understanding is that China and Taiwan began to assert territorial claims only in the early 1970s, at a time when it was starting to be thought that there were resources in the seabed.
東シナ海には領土問題は存在をしておりませんし、また何度となくアメリカは日米安保条約の施行下の中、日米安保条約の適用範囲にあるということは何度も繰り返しているところであります。
So there is no territorial issue in the East China Sea, and as for the United States, they have made clear repeatedly that this issue falls within the scope of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty.
我々は争いを望んでおりませんし、東シナ海が波静かであり続けることを願っておりますし、我々は静かな形で尖閣の実効支配をこれからも続けていくということに尽きると思います。
We certainly do not seek out conflict. We hope that the East China Sea will continue to be peaceable, and we intend to continue our effective control of these islands in a quiet manner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maehara Sensei. I just want to note that copies of Maehara Sensei's speech are out front, but thank you all for coming. Thank you, Congressional Study Group, for your help in putting this together. And most of all, thank you, Maehara Sensei. Terrific.